Welcome to our April website chat. I'm Jennie Stapp, the State Librarian. I'm really glad that you could be here with us today for some updates from the State Library. I know I had the opportunity to see several of you at the conference last month, and it was really great to have an opportunity to come together in person and spend time in fellowship together. So glad to have a chance to be with you, and thanks for joining us today. As a reminder, you can go ahead and rename yourself. We'd love to know where you're from, who you're representing. Please do feel free to share questions in the chat. And I do want to take time to answer your questions. I really do appreciate them, so don't be shy. So what we have on deck for you today, I want to share some updates about the legislative session and how that's going. The commission had a meeting at the Library Association conference at the end of last month and wanted to share some updates from that meeting. And then maybe what's on most of our minds is the status of the Institute of Museum and Library Services and how that may be impacting the work of the state library and services around the state. So let's dive right in. I keep trying to knock on wood. So far, this legislative session has been sort of relatively benign for the state library and the library community, and I'm really grateful for that. The state library's funding, which is in the state budget bill, House Bill 2, appears secure. We've had no threats, no words of threat to our funding at all throughout the session. We also don't have any new monies. And I would say that that's fairly typical for most other agencies of our size within state government. And so not having a reduction in funds, to me, that's a positive place for us to be. There were a handful of anti-library bills proposed. They were introduced and heard in committee in late February, and none of those bills even got out of committee. They were mostly proposed by the same legislator out of Great Falls, and they were heard in the Senate Education Committee, which in our view wasn't a terribly friendly committee to our issues, and so we did expect for at least one of those bills to get out of committee. And so we were really thinking about a strategy that would have attempted to kill those bills on the Senate floor. And we were very grateful to see that they didn't even make it out of that first committee. I've heard from other people, and I think we're starting to feel this as we look around the country. It feels like libraries aren't quite in the political fray that they were even a year or two ago. We're starting to feel like that pendulum is starting to swing. There were a number of anti-library bills proposed in other legislators. Most, if not all of them, have been killed or amended to the point where they're not terribly effective. There were some bills that threatened a handful of state libraries around the country. All of those bills have been defeated. Some of you might be aware that there was some threats to the federal funding in South Dakota proposed by the outgoing South Dakota governor. The last I heard, it looked like most, if not all, that funding was going to be restored. And so I think what we're seeing in Montana is mirroring what we're seeing around the country. And I think for that reason, we can all breathe a little bit of a sigh of relief. The bills that we are watching in the legislature right now are those that may continue to affect local government funding and property tax bills. And those are still sort of a political hot potato as we get nearer and nearer to the end of the legislative session. The number of bills are going to be winnowed down, and sort of the best ideas from different bills will end up finding their way into a handful of bills that will ultimately pass. There's one bill that's already gone to the governor's desk that MLA lobbyists have been watching pretty closely. The MLA lobbyists also lobby for the city of Bozeman and the city of Great Falls. And so they have a purview into sort of the local government perspective on what these funding and property tax bills might look like. And it's really been great to have their guidance and insight into how those bills are moving forward. We will see in the next few weeks what ultimately makes it out of the legislative session. And from there, would be able to do further analysis on what that means for local government revenue, and then ultimately downstream what that means for library funding. One of the things that we're really excited about is the possibility of an interim study of the interlibrary resource sharing program. As I think most of you know, the Library Association had sought a sponsor for a bill that would have provided funding for our resource sharing programs. And in this political climate, it just wasn't a great climate to find a champion to carry a piece of legislation for a substantial funding ask. But what they were able to get in place is language in a bill that requires our interim budget committee to conduct a study of the program. And then through that study, we'll have an opportunity to talk about the benefits of resource sharing, and the economic benefits of investment in that program. So it's in House Bill 864, which is what's called a companion bill to the state budget bill, House Bill 2. There are companion bills for each section of the budget. We are in the education section, so House Bill 864 is the companion bill for the education, and it includes things like language and study requirements and other things necessary to carry out the intent of the budget bill. And so having this study called for in that bill guarantees that the study will go forward, assuming that House Bill 864 is passed by the legislature. And it almost has to pass because of the ties to the budget bill. So we're really excited about that. I think it's really going to give libraries a great opportunity to showcase what investment in libraries means for the state of Montana. And then I think finally the concern that is on everyone's minds is just the general nature of federal funding right now. Agencies and other agencies and local governments and nonprofits in Montana are all being affected by pauses and cuts to federal funding. Of course, we've seen the significant market volatility this week as we've seen the reaction to the federal tariffs that have been proposed. Much of the state's revenue is tied up in various forms of investments that are subject to that market volatility. So I think we can all agree that there's just immense uncertainty about the economy right now, and that's driving uncertainty in planning for revenue for the state and then ultimately spending for the state. And nobody has a crystal ball, nobody has a lot of answers at this point. So the legislature is feeling fairly uncertain about the status of the budget going forward. And for that reason, we're hearing rumors that they will likely adjourn early, potentially as early as the next couple of weeks, in order to save some days and buy themselves some time to come back in a special session. I think you all know that the legislature meets for 90 days every other year. And so they can adjourn early, save some of those 90 days, and use them to come back in a special session when they would perhaps have more clarity on the status of federal funding, the impact to federal policy on the revenue that's coming into Montana, and make any adjustments necessary once they have more information. So we will not be surprised to see them pass a budget and wrap up some additional work here in the next couple of weeks and then adjourn. Are there any questions about the legislative session? Right now, if they were to go for 90 days, it would wrap up by May 5th. May 5th is their last scheduled day. And if you think of something, feel free to drop it in chat. All right. The commission was very glad to have their meeting at the Library Association conference a couple of weeks ago now. We made sure that they had time in their agenda so that they could participate in some of the learning opportunities for trustees that occurred on Wednesday afternoon. One of the pre-conferences led by our own Kara and Corey on the roles and responsibilities of library boards, and then the commission presented in their conversations for commission the next day. I wanted to be sure and let you all know that at that meeting, the commission recognized our Excellent Library Services Awards recipients, and congratulations. I know several of you are on this website chat today, so congratulations on those recognitions. This is, of course, the last year that we're awarding the Excellent Library Services Award under this current model, and a subcommittee of the commission led by Kara is looking at what the commission wants to recognize, how we want to acknowledge and recognize excellence going forward. So look for more information about the future of the Excellent Library Services Award later this fall. One of the goals of the commission this year is to better understand the continuing education program at the state library, and also to understand how we can support learning for our trustees. And so Coley and Tracy presented a great overview of the history and current status of both our continuing education program and the trustees' involvement in taking the continuing education and earning certification. So the commission next step is going to be to invite some representatives from the education departments in the state of Montana, the Office of Public Instruction, and the Board of Public Ed to share information with the commission about what their continuing education program looks like, where it's similar and where it might be a little bit different from the program that the state library offers. We don't yet have any formal goals or outcomes proposed by the commission as part of this study, but it is one of the goals that the commission is working on this year. The commission has been asking for regular updates on the status of the hotspot funding, and that was also a topic of discussion at the conversations with the commission. And I want to thank Savannah for the regular communication she and Gil have been putting out about the status of hotspot funding. And just to make sure everybody is aware, the state funds that are funding that program right now do run out at the end of June. And we have applied for federal funds for the continuation of those programs through 2 different state agencies. The last we've heard is that those grant awards should be revisited on or around April 21st. And we don't yet know what might come of that grant review. We're waiting to hear. I think that the message that we want to convey to everyone is there is a significant likelihood that funding for this program through the state library may end at the end of June. So please be thinking about whether or not that's a program that you want to continue locally, and whether or not you have the local funds to do that. Gil and Savannah are putting together a significant amount of information about the status of the hotspots that are currently in use around the state, how they could potentially be redistributed based on libraries' interest in continuing that program. We have information about the costs of continuing that program and so forth. So if the funding runs out at the end of June, we want to do all we can to sort of give you a nice soft launch into continuing that program locally, if that's something that you're interested in able to do. The next meeting of the commission is going to be on June 13th. That is a Friday. Someone reminded me it's Friday the 13th. Typically it would have been on June 11th, but we have some commissioners traveling on the 11th, so it's been pushed off until June. It is going to also start at a later time. It's going to start at 10 a.m. rather than 9 a.m. Given some of the travel restrictions that we have in place right now, the commission's going to not plan to stay overnight here in Helena, so we'll be coming in a little bit later for that meeting. We'll continue the discussion about the continuing education. As I mentioned, one of the action items for that meeting is the FY26 Federation Plans of Service. We'll have further discussions about our state and federal funding, depending on the timing of the and outcome of the legislative session. We may or may not have a budget to propose at that meeting. And then we'll have some opportunities for other standard discussion and reporting as well. So that's what's up with the State Library Commission.
Jenny, did you see Mary Drew's question about who would do the resource sharing study? I don't know if you wanted to elaborate on that.
Yeah, you bet. As Tracy said, it's the Education Interim Budget Committee. And so every section of the state's budget has a committee. And as I mentioned, we fall under the Education Committee. Those committees represent representatives and senators on the Appropriations and the Senate Finance and Claims committees. Years ago, probably up until about 2021, those committees basically just met when the legislature was in session, and they would hear and act on agency budgets only during the legislative session. In 2021, they passed legislation to allow those budget committees to meet during the interims to continue to stay abreast on agency spending and agency priorities that might impact budget requests in the next legislative session. I think this has been just a really, really positive change for the legislature. For us, it means that we get to interact a lot more regularly with our budget committee. As a small agency, it often felt like we were sort of a much lower priority, and they would see us once a year or once every other year and not know a lot about our work when we were coming to them with budget requests. So it's been great to have the opportunity to work with them more regularly. They typically meet once a quarter or so during the interim. And so it is that committee that would conduct this study, and they would dedicate a legislative staffer and work with us to outline the objectives of the study, what they want to know more about, and what outcomes they're seeking from that study. You've heard me talk about Chair Dave Beatty out of the Bitterroot from Hamilton. He is the chair of that committee and just a really strong supporter of our work and the work of libraries. Some of you might remember that he received MLA's Legislative Champion Award 2 years ago during the MLA conference. They will probably have their first introductory meeting in June. Other questions about the legislature or the commission before I move on to topics around IMLS? I advance the slide? That's the question. There we go. Someone. All right. So we have not had a chance to have a website chat since the executive order on March 14th was issued. I think some of you were at the conference and probably heard me speak about what's happening, and I'm sure you've seen my emails to Wired and the information that's been going out via some of our other communication channels. I guess I would start by saying prior to March 14th, we all were seeing and hearing examples of federal funding being cut or paused, federal employees being laid off. And so in my mind, it was sort of just a matter of time until those changes started impacting our federal funder, the Institute of Museum and Library Services. That impact came on March 14th, kind of in two ways. There was an acting director of IMLS, Cindy Landrum. The IMLS was in between directors. The outgoing director, Crosby Kemper, had left a little over a year ago. He was a librarian serving as director. And the way the statute that governs IMLS works, there's a trade-off. There's a director from the library side and then a director from the museum side, and they serve for about 5 years. The Biden administration had not appointed a museum director, and so Cindy was acting in an interim capacity. She was told on March 14th that she was going to no longer be the acting director and would be moved back into her original position as the director of library services. And then late in the day on March 14th, President Trump signed an executive order directing IMLS and 6 other small agencies to reduce operations to what is minimally required in statute. And that's really sort of all it said. It directed those agencies to create a plan for how they were going to implement this executive order. And that plan was due the following Friday. We have not seen that plan. I know that there have been FOIA requests trying to see that plan that have been denied. So nobody really knows what that plan said. And I think most people at this point aren't terribly concerned. It was a plan that was created by previous staff who in most cases are not in place anymore. When we looked at statute, one of the things that we looked at was the fact that the grants to states funding, which is the funding that comes to all state libraries, including the Montana State Library, to fund library development, is a statutory requirement. It's very plain, in plain language, that the grants to states program is a statutory program of the Institute of Museum and Library Services. And so that gave us some degree of assurance. A couple of weeks after the executive order was issued, most IMLS staff were put on administrative leave. And then last week, most of them received layoff notices effective in early May. So most of our partners that we've worked with very closely there have been laid off at this point. IMLS have said that they are going to have a staff of about a dozen people going forward, and those include a library services officer, a museum services officer, a director, some attorneys, a CIO. So just a handful of positions. They previously had about 77 staff, and we understand that they'll be down to about a dozen staff. We had received word following the March 14th actions from Congress to pass a continuing resolution that we should receive our grants to states funding for next fiscal year So we were operating under the understanding that funding should continue forward. So we were very, very surprised last week when 3 state libraries received word that their FY24, their current fiscal year award, had been terminated, with very little information about why it was being terminated. And so that news for us was very alarming. We, in state libraries around the country, expected to receive similar statements after that occurred, and we have not. We have not received any kind of communication that our grants to states funding has been terminated. But the fact that 3 states received that termination notice without any real clear information is a source of concern. So what we've done here at the state library is to make sure that we are only spending dollars that are necessary to spend before the end of the fiscal year. We are not approving any form of travel or any unnecessary spending in order to give us the greatest latitude in our ability to expend our state budget for the next few months, given the nature of that kind of uncertainty. We continue to hope that we will receive our FY25 award from IMLS. We've also been communicating with the governor's office as well as the legislature about the concerns that we have about the future of our federal funding, in the hopes that the state might be able to backfill the loss of some of that funds. And as I said previously, the governor's office as well as the legislature is monitoring closely the impact of the loss of federal funds across the state, as well as the impact of federal funding on the overall economy. That is certainly something that could be addressed either before the end of this session or in a special session if it comes to that. The good news is, and this is very good news, starting really earlier this week, but escalating over the last couple of days, we have started to see funds flow from IMLS. We don't receive the dollars up front. We have to ask for them through drawdown requests. And there had been a period of 3 or 4 weeks where states had put forth drawdown requests but not seen them funded, and that was alarming to many state libraries. There are many states that don't have as much flexibility in their cash flow as we do, and so they were facing some very dire decisions here in the last day or two. But I'm very grateful that IMLS has started to fund those drawdown requests. States across the country are starting to report that they're seeing their funding coming in. We ourselves had a drawdown request filled just this morning. So that is good news. It's not enough for me to feel like we need to change direction. I think we need to continue to be very, very conservative in our approach to spending over the next several months until we see something more concrete coming out of IMLS, but it does give us some relief in the near future. We have not made any decisions from the state library about what it would mean for us to lose funds. I think trying to make any concrete decisions right now is premature. As I said, we're starting to see funds come into the state. There is some opportunity for the state to step in and provide some funding. And, you know, we have not been told that we are going to lose these funds. And so until we receive more concrete information, we are not at a point where we need to decide to cancel services. We do have information available about what services are IMLS fund that's available that we've shared and we can continue to share with all of you. The other thing that we are working on is sort of more user-friendly language and information that we can make available. Our hope is that that will give you more concrete information that you can share with your patrons, with your library boards, with your staff. So everybody has the same understanding of what the risks to IMLS are and the services that are funded with IMLS dollars, so that everybody has a really clear understanding of what we know, what we don't know, and kind of a timeline for making decisions about the future of our services. So look for that information coming from us probably next week. The other thing I wanted to say about IMLS funding, as well as our partners at Montana Humanities, is we are seeing other dollars terminated. I think many of you probably received notice from Humanities Montana last week that they lost their funding from the National Endowment for Humanities. That's a significant amount of their funding. And they've already had to cancel their speakers bureau. Yesterday, as a lot of this was happening, we received word from the Montana University System and Exploration Works, the Science Museum here in Helena, that they lost their IMLS grants. So they were terminated effective this week. I have not heard anything more from Joy Bridwell at this point, but she and we have heard that tribal libraries around the state are also receiving termination notices for their basic library services grants that they get from IMLS. There was a number of states where the tribes were receiving that information yesterday. As of about this time yesterday, Joy had not received that, but I know she was very, very worried. There are 3 tribal college libraries that receive those basic grants here in Montana. So while we at the state library are breathing just a little bit more of a sigh of relief today, we feel deeply for our friends in those institutions that are dealing with much more dire circumstances. And I feel like I've been the bearer of bad news for a very long time. At some point, I want to bring you some good news. What questions do you have? Thanks, Nancy. We're all doing the best we can. I'm curious, what are you all doing to be resilient right now? National Library Week. Yeah. What have you been doing to celebrate, Mary Drew?
Well, we don't usually do a lot, but I have flowers out with a sign that says, "Say thanks to your library staff," because it's National Library Week. I just want the patrons to know that it is that week and to appreciate the library. I'm pretty sure they have heard some news, but mostly they're looking at Humanities Montana right now.
Yeah. Yeah.
And our staff got chocolates and they got flowers, and somebody brought in chips and guacamole today.
Oh my gosh, how fantastic.
And our board got everyone a $50 gift certificate to the local grocery store.
Oh, that's so nice.
We have a small staff, so they can do that.
That's great. I don't know if Corey's on here. I don't see her. Corey and I have gotten into a routine of whenever I send out an IMLS update, she sends me a baby photo. So that's definitely a moment of joy for me. Oh, congratulations, Sarah. That's awesome.
Yeah, we're pretty excited. It's only for 5 of them. But it's a very supportive local endowment fund that's incredibly supportive of the library. And we're seeking some other grant funding or donation funding, but 5 gives us a little bit of breathing room. It's a huge thing for our patrons. So we're pretty excited about that.
That's great. Very cool. Janet, I see your question in the chat. There was a news story last week that said it was Washington, California, and Connecticut that said that they were funding DEI programs with their grants to states dollars, and so that's why they were targeted. That doesn't really jive with the reality of how states are using their funds and or not using them, and which ones were targeted. So that's what we've been told, but it doesn't really jive with the reality. I mean, I literally wonder if it was just a mistake. Part of me wonders that. Things have been pretty haphazard and chaotic in that office right now with the loss of the staff that were there. So I hope, well, I don't know what to hope. I don't know if to hope that I'm wrong or that I'm right.
Jenny, my hope springs anew, and that's why we have so many awesome events coming up. We're packing the calendar with webinars and other learning opportunities. So I just wanted to say that that's part of my hope for, how we round out this fiscal year, is that we're just going to continue to do the things that we do, and hopefully there'll be some great learning opportunities for everybody in the coming weeks.
Thanks, Colette. I think that's so important. I mean, who doesn't want to take advantage of some great learning opportunities, and B, we've got great work to do. So we can just keep rolling up our sleeves and doing our great work. And some days may be harder than others, but we're so fortunate to be doing the good work that we're doing. You know how to get a hold of me, so please feel free to reach out. I'm happy to visit with all of you. Thanks, everyone.